Most brutal deaths ever preserved in fossils.
Ever heard of the show 1,000 Ways to Die? Well, if you take a look at our 300,000 years of history, you'll soon come to realize that 1,000 isn't nowhere close to cutting it. Try more.
No, the 1,000 Ways to... I don't think there's a worse way to die historically than some of the things on 1,000 Ways to Die. That show was so, like, not traumatic, but if you never watched that, it would go into detail about how some people got, like, decapitated or got their soul sucked out of their body and then all their organs came with it, or some like they died to a vacuum or something, and it was like a very painful way to die. So I don't know if they're going to beat that.
And through the ages, people have had to endure some pretty painful demises, some of which were definitely worse than others. But thankfully, thanks to technology and general progress, horrific endings are becoming less common than they used to be, especially because of just how tough ancient Earth was compared to now. And we can only guess what kind of bowl our ancestors had to go through. But once in a while...
I mean, what's the worst way to die historically? Like pre-civilization? Getting eaten alive? Getting eaten alive or dying to, like, bugs or something? Like, you're, like, so weak that you could tell they got eaten alive. Your skin getting ripped off. Yeah. People used to, like, brutalize each other. That's definitely probably pretty bad. Drowning. People still drown today.
We don't have to, as occasionally, researchers will get really lucky at the expense of a seriously unfortunate individual. And we get to see firsthand some of the catastrophic injuries that ancient people had to endure, and sometimes even survived. But the first case definitely wasn't a survival.
Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. I feel like you would die very fast if that was the way you passed.
Kind of situation. And unfortunately, is a mode of death still within the realm of possibility, as it was a shark attack. But not just any old shark attack, but rather the first conclusive one recorded in history.
The first ever person to get eaten alive by a shark?
Achievement that certainly nobody wants to have, but nonetheless goes to a 3,400-year-old hunter-gatherer from Japan, simply dubbed...
I feel like that's uncommon, though, for somebody to die that long ago to a shark, like BC era, because you're not leaving the shore often. And if you are, yeah, they are fishing. They're probably free diving for fish with, like, a spear. And they end up getting attacked.
Tsukumo 24. The discovery was made in 2021 off the coast of the Seto Inland Sea, where researchers located a male human skeleton in really rough condition, being absolutely covered in lacerations that spread across his arms, chest, abdomen.
Oh, he probably had to fight for his life, dude. It was biting his whole body.
And hands. Originally, researchers were quite horrified and confused, as they were so deep that they marked bone, and matched what was seen in wounds caused by metal weapons, not animals or non-metal tools like a stone knife. What's more is that they weren't just looking at a few cuts, and not even a dozen or two, but instead over 500, 790 to be precise. And what made everything all the more
and the shark didn't eat him, which means it either spit him out or he got away.
Weird was that the man had belonged to the Jomon culture, in which metalwork was absent, meaning it wasn't some deranged serial killer that had caused this with a metal weapon. Therefore, they took another look at the injuries, and noticed this time around that they were V-shaped and identical to those seen in modern-day shark attacks. This, in conjunction to his location, which was on an archipelago, led to the conclusion that a large tiger shark or great white had killed him, and it really did a number on him during the attack, administering multiple injuries that were fatal within their own right, including the fracture or tearing of every rib, the evisceration of his chest cavity and abdomen, and to top it all off, multiple dismemberments, which included...
How did they find his body? He got buried, so did his people get him? Like, it ate his arm, it ate his hand and his entire leg off. He probably died before, it was probably just flailing his limp body.
These missing extremities also helped to tell researchers that the poor bloke was alive in the initial attack, since he likely used his hands and feet to defend himself, during which they were then bit off. This got rid of the possibility of the whole thing being a scavenging event as opposed to
oh my god, he probably shoved his whole leg in the shark's mouth.
Attack, but led to a new question of why the shark had attacked him in the first place, as it was his left leg that bore the most deep bites, heavily implying an unprovoked ambush attack. And the answer was hidden in his bizarre final resting place. Opposed to being found at sea, as one would expect, or in a place that was once submerged, the victim was found in a traditional burial site, and his bodies did not show signs of being in the water for long, meaning that he likely wasn't alone at the time of the attack. And given that the
And other people died?
Roman people were exceptional fishers, the current belief is that a group of people had gone out on a boat to catch fish. At some point
And left his ass? Or they saw him get attacked and then picked up his dead body?
during the fishing excursion, the unlucky man had left the boat and got into the water to perhaps spearfish or to simply bring up a catch, not knowing that the spilled blood in the water had attracted a shark, which then swiftly attacked him. Seeing he was in danger and under attack, the others that were with him then came to the rescue and pulled him up. But it was already too late, and the only thing they could do was bury him, as he likely died well before reaching the shore.
Wow, bro.
Now, if you're planning a trip to Japan, don't panic quite yet.
And that's such a weird, like how you have to process that in the BC times. I mean, it's definitely more commonplace then to witness people die in that gruesome manner. But even then, dude, you're fishing with your friends or your family members. Your friend gets eaten alive by a shark and you just go, well, all I can do is bury him and move on.
Yes, there are still sharks there now, but the situation was much dicier back then, with a number of known shark teeth implying that their populations were significantly higher than they are now. And this is also reflected by the Jomon culture, which features multiple art pieces that depict various sharks, namely hammerheads and tiger sharks. So it's likely that attacks were much more common back then. Now clearly, this particular incident had a rather regrettable ending. But not all horrific injuries ended so poorly, as sometimes ancient humans not only survived traumatic wounds, but even thrived afterwards, as best showcased by the world's oldest known amputation, which dates back to 31,000 years ago. For a long time, researchers have been well aware that amputation—
Dude, imagine trying to amputate pre-medicine. Fuck. How do you even do that? You're just in the wild, you're like, yeah, I gotta cut off your leg, dude. A saw? No, you would probably get like an axe. Probably get an axe. Like if you were with your friends, you need to amputate your leg, you'd probably put your leg out and then like on a piece of like chopped wood, and you would just go boom and just fucking try and strike it clean through.
Occurred before modern medicine, but previously the oldest known case was only 7,000 years old, involving a Neolithic farmer from Europe. So everyone was pretty excited when in 2020, a group of scientists stumbled upon a much older specimen in Borneo that bore signs of a successful amputation. The individual in question was found in the Liang Tibo cave.
Why would they amputate your leg in that time? How bad of a limb, how bad of a condition your limb would have to be in? Infection? Yeah. But how bad it would have to be for them to go, we're going to amputate it. Bro said cancer. They didn't know if they had cancer then. 8,000 years ago, if you had cancer in your leg, you didn't know it. Okay? You were just fucked up. And you didn't know why. Yeah, if there was like an obviously like probably a wound that got really infected and it just kept getting worse, and so they probably went, yeah, we're just going to take your leg.
Left leg and foot. At first, there was an idea that it was lost in some traumatic accident, which then possibly killed the individual. Yet researchers noticed that not only was the wound extremely clean, but it was also healed and seemed purposeful, and the rest of the leg was partially withered and child-sized, while the specimen overall was clearly a young adult, making an amputation as a child the likeliest scenario. Now, because this took place over 30,000 years ago, painkillers were probably absent, and the amputation would have—
Wouldn't you pass out, though, at some point? I think if you had to chop somebody's leg off, they'd faint. It would hurt like a bitch, and then you would just knock. Like, it would become so painful that you'd pass out.
Have occurred with a sharpened stone tool, and yet somehow, the ancient surgeon not only managed to finesse their way around veins, arteries, nerves, and tissue, but kept the area completely free of infection.
How? Somebody 8,000 years ago with like fucking rock tools and just sharp rocks were like, yeah, I'm going to cut your leg off and make sure that I don't have you bleed out.
Feat still impressive by modern standards, as some studies report an infection rate of up to 40% after major amputations. And the prehistoric individual went on to survive into adulthood, only dying in their 20s from something unrelated and currently unknown. But now, this all begs the question, why did they need an amputation in the first place?
And that's fucked, man, that most people then died at that time. like, we're older, regardless of how old you are in my chat right now, you're older than most people that have ever lived. Well, because most people died in their infancy. And after that, you'd probably get killed in, like, your 20s. That's cap? No, most people... Dude, infant mortality was so high back then that you just cranked out kids. Because the odds that your kid lived past the age of, like, 5 was so low. They'd probably either die at birth or they would just have some sort of infection or die of, like, malnutrition. Or there's so many... Because you're so weak in that time, immune system-wise. You're so weak physically. You can't do anything yourself that if anything were to happen, you're just cooked.
A possible idea is that it had something to do with the area that they lived, as the terrain surrounding the cave is extremely rugged, elevated, and littered with large rocks and cliffs. Therefore, the person could have taken a particularly nasty fall or got hit by a rock that mangled their leg to the point that amputation was necessary. And while it's thought that they survived for nearly a decade after the incident, it would not have been easy, as they still needed to navigate a mountainous area with
one fucking leg, dude. Imagine having to hobble around. I mean, they probably used a stick as like a crutch, but still.
Just one leg. And therefore, they must have relied quite a bit on others for care, demonstrating one of the earlier cases of human compassion. But alas, we also know that humans in the past, and present for that matter, can be quite cruel. And you know this all too well if you saw my recent video about the Neolithic bottleneck. That was a period of unusually cruel violence, which could be downright horrifying to say the least. And one of the worst cases of it was seen in the girls of St. Paul Troy, Château, France. This grisly discovery involved 3 women who were found buried together back in the 80s, but dated to about 5,500 years ago. And only recently did scientists unveil that a cruel sacrificial ritual had taken place.
Oh shit, what, they hog-tied her and then killed them?
In total, 3 victims were found, and yet 2 of them were buried in very contorted positions and stuffed into very tight spaces, while being completely covered by heavy grindstones, likely meant to keep them down and from moving, signifying that these 2 had been buried alive and against their will.
Buried alive? So they suffocated in the dirt? No fucking way they killed people like that then.
More, the positions of their arms and legs suggested that while decayed now, a rope had at some point not only bound them, but tied their legs to their necks.
And that's like an even higher level of consciousness too. I mean, obviously this was 5,000 years ago, so there was like, you know, societies existed, but still, they were effectively torturing people before killing them.
Causing them to involuntarily strangle themselves. And coincidentally,
I wonder the first time that happened, like a punishment-based death, or something where you killed somebody emotionally versus physically. Because early human-to-human interaction, you probably only killed each other if it was like based on survival or in-depth fights to where you would just literally fight each other to death versus having such a high level of power over another human being where you're able to prolong the pain of their own death.
Mirroring a torturous killing tactic sometimes used by the Italian mafia, named incapacitamento. However, while mafias do it today for revenge against traitors, these Neolithic murders were some sort of agricultural sacrifice, as they were buried in a structure that mimicked a silo grain. And the third woman,
wow, but they didn't even agree to do it. They just grabbed 3 random women.
Was buried on top of them, unbound, and above the stones, presumably for symbolic purposes. The location was also quite peculiar, as it was built in a way that during the solstice, the sun would shine directly onto the silo. So in other words, whoever was behind this was quite twisted, yet unarguably well organized. Now, a less organized, but more strange and rare killing took place not so long before this. However, this incident occurred on the other side of the world, and involved the only known prehistoric sapien to be found in a tar pit, the La Brea woman. In case you didn't know, Los Angeles is home to the La Brea tar pits, which is actually an active paleontology site that has served as a predator trap for tens of thousands of years, as animals who got stuck in the sticky tar would in turn attract many unknowingly doomed carnivores. And it is believed,
but then wouldn't the carnivores also die themselves, or no?
To be up to 50,000 years old. And through the years, paleontologists have recovered thousands of iconic Ice Age specimens, like direwolves, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, American lions, mammoths, mastodons, and then primates. Or rather, a primate. To be specific, a lone woman. Believed to have been between 18 to 30 years old at death, the La Brea woman is a well-preserved skeleton that consists of cranium, mandible, and postcranial material. In life, she likely stood around 4 feet 10 inches, or 1.5 meters tall, and lived some 10,000 years ago, or based on her dentistry, she sustained herself on a diet heavy in stone ground meal that apparently led to tooth issues, and could have caused quite a bit of pain in life. But putting all that to the
Dude, I think about that constantly when I brush my teeth. Obviously, you know, we have regular privileges that other people, even today or, you know, prehistorically, didn't. But every time you brush your teeth, I always go, like, have you guys ever had a cavity? What the fuck did they do then? Somebody redeemed dent. What the fuck did they do then? Just knock your tooth out? Like some Tom Hanks stranded on an island type shit? If you had a cavity and your tooth hurt really bad, there's no way they just left it there to rot. They had to get it out some way or another. They didn't have, like, tooth care. I know they had, like, very makeshift toothbrushes that existed. They did clean their teeth, but not efficiently to the degree where they wouldn't have, like, fucked up teeth. But at the same time, cavities were less likely, right? Because they didn't eat foods that caused cavities. That the odds of them getting cavities were less because they weren't eating the foods that we eat, but they did get cavities, right? When you eat really sugary foods and, like, things that decay your enamel, that's going to cause you to get a cavity. And they obviously weren't eating that frequently, but I bet they did have a lot of tooth problems.
You see, this was quite odd, as Paleo-Indians were definitely well aware that such a pit was dangerous and best to be avoided, which led researchers to suspect that she had a rather nefarious helping hand in ending up there. And upon
Like somebody kicked her in there?
further examination, they did indeed find that her jaw had actually been broken, while her skull
No! Like somebody fought her and then threw her in a fucking tar pit?
had been fractured and possessed a small hole in it, indicative of a powerful strike. Not one that came from an animal, but rather from a quote-unquote fellow human, which, if accurate, would make her LA's oldest known murder victim, given the age of the skeleton. And though highly debated, it's been hypothesized that given the location, that she had belonged to the Chumash people. Yet why she was attacked is not known, nor if the attack came from her own group, over personal discourse, or if it originated from a hostile party that was looking for resources. Additionally, even though her wounds were almost 100% guaranteed to be fatal, given the level of medicine at the time, it's not clear if she had died first and then was dumped in the tar pit, or if she was thrown in there while wounded, but actually died from sinking under and suffocating in the tar. Now obviously, neither are good ways to go. And honestly, I'm not sure if I'd rather get bonked or drown. And unfortunately though, we know that definitely happened with another specimen, who is now known as the first modern human that we know of to have drowned. And
I think drowning's the worst way to go from a natural cause of death standpoint. I'm not talking like prolonged death from like Alzheimer's or something. I'm saying like being lit on fire, drowning, freezing to death. I think burning to death and drowning are probably the worst from like natural standpoints. Burning to death might be worse. I think burning to death, you're dying quicker though. At some point, would you feel the pain if you're burning? I don't want to Google that. I'm just thinking if you were on fire, your whole body's on fire, you're going to die fast. It's going to be agonizing pain, and then you're dead. I think drowning, it's like slow. And aren't you still alive after you pass out when you're drowning for like 5-10 minutes? Because the lungs, like your lungs fill with water, and then you're still just there, like living. Yeah, you feel your lungs collapse. That, I don't know. That's like scarier. They're both horrible. I think freezing to death is definitely the option if I had to choose between the three. Because you like fall asleep.
Meaning that at any rate, this Neolithic man who dated to 5,500 years ago still lived in the area when it was absolutely bone dry. Yet his body was found in a round stone structure on top of seashells, which
yeah, probably because he didn't know how to swim.
Does kind of make sense because he lived on the coast, meaning that water was accessible. Originally, scientists weren't sure what happened to him, as he wasn't super old, being about 35 to 45 years old at the time of his death, and he didn't have any clear fatal injury or disease either. However, because he lived close to the sea and was buried with lots of shells, there was a thought that he drowned. But how does one figure out if a 5,000-year-old plus man drowned or didn't, with just bones? And surprisingly, you take a look at those bones and look for diatoms, which is basically any member of a large group comprising of several genera of algae. And alas, diatoms—
What? They can look at a bone. They can look at a guy's bones from that long ago and be like, yeah, there's algae. He probably drowned. He probably died in the water. What?
That's a very unpleasant sign, because the only way that diatoms can end up in one's bones is that you inhale water such that when it reaches the lungs, your pulmonary alveoli rupture, where then salt water rushes into your bloodstream before making it into your bone marrow, and hence the presence of these algae. So, a very brutal ending for an already harsh life. As it turns out, the man was already in very poor condition, showing signs of having arthritis bad enough to damage his bones. And his legs are roughed up as well, suggesting a life spent squatting, perhaps to harvest shells. While his arms and shoulders were further messed up, reflecting a life rich in swimming, rowing, and harpooning, which matches the assumption that he was part of a coastal community.
But then how did he drown? Like rough waters mixed with arthritis and an aging body?
And you know, just for a cherry on top, he also appeared to be extremely iron deficient, an ailment that was chalked up to a severe tapeworm infection, which can be common in mishandled.
Oh my God, bro. Yo, thank fuck we're not alive in the BC eras, dude. Like, yeah, we're all gonna die like them, but god damn, bro, that sucks.
And just to make everything a tad bit more tragic, it turns out that he did not die alone, but with 3 others. Another male,
They also drowned with him?
an adult female, and even 1 infant. Radiocarbon found that all 4 had died at the same time. But how, you might ask? Well, they lived in a very seismic area, and so it's believed that an earthquake and then a subsequent tsunami is what did them in. But what's rather
We're looking at bones from thousands of years ago and we're going, yeah, there was probably an earthquake and then a tsunami just crashed over them.
And the current hypothesis is that the man just accidentally drowned, maybe while diving down to forage, while the others just happened to die around the same time and location from other causes. After all, the Atacama Desert was and is a very grueling place, where it can be hot, cold, and very, very dry. Although it should be said that Earth back then was also just in general tough, disregarding location, and sometimes we humans made it more painful than it already was and had to be. I mean, just take a look at this guy, or this girl, or really any of the other 38 humans found in France with holes in their skulls. What you're looking at is not a mass murder crime scene or even warfare, but
No, is this like a type of medicine they had? What is it called? It starts with a T. Like not trepanning or something, where they would drill holes in your skull. Yeah, it is trepanning. They drill holes in your skull to relieve pressure.
what you're looking at is not a mass murder crime
That's a very big hole, though. I don't think that's a regular size hole they would do.
scene or even warfare, but rather a poor attempt at surgery,
Yep.
also known as trepanning, which, as the skulls
That's me. I knew that.
show, involved drilling a hole into one's head, and was perhaps Homo sapiens' first widespread surgery. Unfortunately,
But they did that while you were awake. Trepanned by obsidian. Imagine your friend has a fucking like big head problem or like a massive like headache. He gets migraines and shit. And you go, yeah, dude, sit down. And you take a sharp obsidian rock and just go. Like how painful that would be.
making it one of the oldest, if not the first cases of trepanning that we know of. But it was by no means isolated, and multiple
Yo, like that guy botched the hell out of that. That's too big of a hole.
sites have been found with evidence of this strenuous procedure, supplying
That's like a baseball could fit it, bro. Dude was on overtime for the trepanning surgery. This guy just took a fucking mallet and just whacked somebody's skull open. This isn't even carved open. This looks like somebody just got bludgeoned.
us with an abundance of brutal fossils, with some studies even suggesting that up to 10% of all Neolithic people underwent this treatment, if you can call it that. And in the French site, it was closer to 33%. And given the super high rates, you'd assume it was pretty safe. But no, it's about what you'd expect from drilling.
All right, bruh. Oh, they're pointing here. I was gonna say, is this the pressure hole? Is this the pressure hole? They just open this guy's skull cap just wide open. When it rains, he goes, oh, my brain's a little cold.
A hole in your head, and less than 40% of the skulls showed any signs of healing, meaning more than 60% died, with the main ways of death likely being infection.
Then why did they do the surgery? What did they have going that bad where they were like, yeah, dude, there's a more than a half chance that you're probably going to die from this. Let me whack your skull open.
Blood loss, and of course, trauma to the brain if the surgeon went too deep. And even if they were in the metaphorical clear, healing was no joke, often taking several months for the area to close up. And even then, it was likely you'd still feel awful. Plus the fact you had to endure the surgery itself, which definitely took place with no painkillers or anesthesia.
Oh yeah, they probably just had a big dude in a village lay on you. They just went, all right, lock in here. You just whack.
Now to do the surgery,
you just start talking in different accents.
It's thought that sharpened stone knives, or in some cases even seashells, were used to carry out the procedure. And people at virtually every age were found having done this.
What is it, Megamind? Why bro's skull look like this?
And so looking at the widespread nature of this procedure, you might ask, what was the purpose of this? Well, basically anything, according to some. Potential reasons included spiritual purposes, treatment for epilepsy, relieving head wounds, which were more common at the time, courtesy of ourselves, or it could have been done.
How did they figure that drilling a hole into a skull would fix epilepsy?
Relieving head wounds, which were more common at the time, courtesy of ourselves, or it could have been done for something as simple as a headache. So basically,
nah, dude. You wake up and tell your friend, God, my head's been hurting the last few days. He just grabs you and just straps you to a fucking rock. Don't worry, man, I got you. And just starts whacking into your skull.
If you wake up in ancient times and you have a throbbing migraine, best
don't tell anyone
to keep that to yourself. And perhaps surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, this surgery remained popular for quite some time, and actually is still carried out today, just with a bit more precision and only done in select cases. Not to mention,
when do they do that now?
We now have much better management for the procedure and pain. And speaking of pain, that's something we seem to have left behind too. Of course, it's still a thing, but I more mean that life used to be so much more harsh and agonizing due to lesser technology.
A lobotomy? No, lobotomy is when they go through your eye. A lobotomy is when they go through your eye and they slice a part of your brain.
I mean, just ask the girl of Uchter Moor, affectionately known as Mura by some. She is an Iron Age specimen that is also a bog body. In other words, a human that was found and sometimes naturally mummified within a peat bog. And just in case you're wondering what that is,
what is a bog? Like a swamp?
It is a wetland that has accumulated peat, surprise surprise, and other decayed organic material. Now Mura was originally located in the year 2000, and her founders actually thought that she had been a girl that went missing after visiting a club many decades before. But after doing some testing, they realized that she was in reality a 1,000-plus-year-old skeleton who had lived in Iron Age.
They thought she was a modern human.
Germany, and despite only being around 17 to 19, had endured more pain than most in their lifetime. Just about every bit of her body had some sort of damage to it. And even looking at it as a whole, researchers concluded that she must have led a life of intense physical labor, probably consisting of carrying heavy loads like water jugs as she routinely navigated through the marshlands. Then her head had not one, but 2 severe fractures that had healed over, demonstrating brain injuries that might have come from attacks by hostile people or even people within our own community, with her shape reflecting blunt impacts. And we do know that head trauma and violence were a bit more common during the Iron Age, but at any rate, she definitely survived that specific ordeal. Yet she likely suffered from frequent headaches and potentially—
Yeah, like how peaceful do you think those civilizations were? I never understand that. Like small groups of hunter-gatherers that are just kind of like living amongst each other. I bet there were some where they got along really well, but I would assume most had ones where they were probably just, you know, once in a while they'd kill each other.
Potentially other neurological symptoms. And it really seems like she couldn't catch a break, because she also appeared to have a benign tumor at the base of her skull that likely just compounded on her already existing headaches, while also causing a curvature in her spine, leading to back pain and chronically inflamed legs, which was severe enough to alter her bones. And while her own body seemed to be against her, so did the environment, as there were further signs that during harsh winters, she endured frequent periods of sickness and in her childhood had chronic malnutrition, reflected by the unusual morphology of her bones. So in other words, each day would have been a challenge for her, even if she didn't have to do anything, let alone survive during the Iron Age. And she clearly did not last long, because even 19 was considered below the life expectancy, which at that point hovered at around 26 years old. Now,
dude, that's so wild. The average person was dying around then. Your 20s, bro. You're living longer than the average human. I think that is, we watched a video about that. If you lived past birth in the Paleolithic era, 22 to 23, Neolithic 20 to 20 to 33, Bronze 26, Greece 25, Ancient Rome 30, early modern Britain, even in 18th century England, it was 25 to 40. But you would still probably see a lot of old people. There was just also a high average of people that died in their 30s.
Murder was off the table, considering that there are no clear signs. And right now, it's tentatively believed that she died in a freak accident. However, one mystery that remains is that she was found alone and naked, with not even any objects or jewelry being associated with her, suggesting that someone had altered her body after death, and then presumably buried her into the bog, which again makes one
Oh, like she didn't die in the bog, like she died, then they stripped her body of everything and threw her in there.
wonder, why? Why not just bury her on land? And the answer is that maybe they were trying to hide something. And sadly, not even in death did Moore get a break, as when she was recovered back in the day, it was done accidentally after a machine had scooped up her remains, but not before ripping them into 100 different pieces that needed to be stitched back together.
Oh.
So with that example alone, I think we can conclude that life can really just be dang hard, which is a fact shared by what is currently the first known victim of the plague, a 5,000-year-old hunter-gatherer from present-day Latvia. He showed signs of having died around the age of 20, and likely did so after being bitten and infected by a rodent. That unassuming bite would one day come to doom him, as it happened to be laced with a bacteria that humanity knows all too well.
The first guy that died to the Black Plague.
Yersinia pestis. In other words, the bacteria responsible for the plagues, like that of Justinian and the Black Death. So, not good. Now, when you get the plague...
Living around that time is probably one of the worst historical times to be alive. It wasn't it like over half of Europe died, or over a third of Europe died? You would walk out in the town, there would just be bodies in the streets of dead people, and you were always just constantly fearful of getting sick, because if you got sick, it was almost a guarantee that you're cooked.
Pneumonic, septicemic, and bubonic. And while we don't know which one the man had, it clearly killed him, and unbeknownst to him, would proceed to kill over 100 million other people through the years. Which is crazy. I mean, seriously, nature just seemed to be more messed up back then. And I already know I mentioned it, but we as humanity seem to follow that trend, especially...
Do you think if somebody got the Black Plague now, they would be able to survive with modern medicine?
And that pun is intended because many of them showed signs of cannibalism. Additionally...
Huh?
Especially during the Neolithic. And there was a buffet of mimed skeletons to choose from that time. And that pun is intended because many of them showed signs of cannibalism. Additionally, we also have nicely preserved specimens that show us that one could go through dismemberment, decapitation, being burned alive, stabbed, bludgeoned, shot with an arrow, or sometimes a combination of all these things together. And obviously, while violence still occurs, in many ways it is comparatively much more tamed in the present. And I should also mention, there is also the trend of doing this to large groups, as well over 100 mass murder sites are known from throughout the world, showcasing ancient man's enthusiasm for violence and creativity.
Or just like mini wars or battles between different states.
And cruelty. Maybe the takeaway is that for all the flaws of the present, maybe today isn't so bad after all.
Wow. Moment of silence for fossilized people must have stopped going in such gruesome manners. Dude, living around that time and then trying to fucking reason why you even exist in that point. Just to fucking live through pain consistently.